What is up, Death Dealers? I've got a brand new Riptide list for you today, and this list is a predominantly Death Dealer list. It is an aggro Riptide deck, pivoting between huge kind of explosive combo turns and also the mid-range style that we like from Riptide. With the advent of the Hunted, we've been given some new cards, and we also have a new meta to work with, and so we have to change our deck accordingly. Luckily for us Riptide gamers, LSS were very kind with this set and decided to give us some brand new heroes that Riptide has some very powerful play into. So I'm just going to go through the deck, explain the choices. There's some spicy options in here as well, and if you'd like to see more content like this, then feel free to subscribe. I'll go through the equipment first. So the main bow is Death Dealer, and our secondary bow is Dreadbore. Death Dealer, you'll play this into 90% of your matchups. Paying 1 resource to draw a card and load every turn is really good. LSS banned universal card draw basically in the game, but we Rangers still get to use it, which maybe shows you kind of the state that Ranger is in. So playing Death Dealer lets you put together some really nice big combo turns to blast people for 30 plus damage, but it also lets you trade very well in a more mid-range style game as well. Dreadbore, this is in here for a few matchups, is mainly only in here for Earth, Verdance and Flooring, because A, you stop them from playing their D-Reps in their hand, that bit's obvious, but you also stop them from decomposing, so you're also stopping their game plan. My general rule with Dreadbore is that if the hero is playing no more than 9 D-Reacts, it's not worth giving up the card draw that you get from Death Dealer to play it. Because if you think about it, if they're playing, say, 6 D-Reacts, which is pretty standard, then they're seeing no more on average than 1 D-React per hand, and they're not seeing a D-React in every hand. So that D-React that was clunky that turn just goes into the arsenal, and then they play it the next turn. So the effect that Dreadbore has, in my opinion, just isn't that impactful. So in most matchups, run Death Dealer. It doesn't matter if they're on 6 D-Reacts, drawing a card every turn is just better than stopping that. Next I'll go over the quivers. We've got 1 copy of Enchanted Quiver. I don't know why you play more than 1 actually, I'm just so used to saying 1, 2, 3 copies. And I also run the quiver of Rustling Leaves. I just realised those are out of the top of the frame, so I've moved them down. Anyway, the Enchanted Quiver, if you've seen my Bard Castaway deck tech, you'll know kind of everything there is to know about the card, but if you haven't, into Aurora, this is for stopping mostly Channel Lightning Valley plays with Sigil of Suffering. Otherwise, just get your value where you can, and we put it in against any other arcane deck and just try and prevent 2 damage where possible. The Quiver of Rustling Leaves, this helps you going second so much, because into aggro decks, if you go second and you draw no arrows, you're instantly so far behind, basically lost the game in some cases. So having a pitch outlet that can potentially net you an extra card is fantastic. It can also be your Hail Mary if you bricked and you believe in the heart of the cards. The 1 arm piece I play is Long Draw Half Glove. It's Battle Worn 1 and it helps you play around Warmongers. I just never find myself needing another arm piece. This card does so much for the deck. It covers a breakpoint, which is very important, and also it helps you increase your threat density in the late game, or if you draw a hand with no buffs in it, then you can keep your engine rolling. For the helmet piece, I am playing New Horizon. It conflicts a little bit with Death Dealer. If you've seen the Bard Castaway video, you'll know how well those 2 pair together. These 2 still pair well together, but you just gotta sequence it a little bit differently. You need the extra arsenal slot with this deck to get over your fatigue decks, because if you're just playing with 1 arsenal slot and you don't have any sort of evasion, you'll get fatigued quite easily by a lot of decks. It's also just great value. Using the extra arsenal slot from New Horizons just once per game is the equivalent to playing Crown of Providence. If you use it more than that, then you've already got more value than you would have from, say, a Crown of Providence. Next, I'll go over the chess pieces. I'm playing Tunic and I'm playing Trench. This combination is very similar to this combination in that Tunic is in there for 90% of the matchups and Trench is just in there for the arcane matchups. Tunic paired with Death Dealer means that once every 3 turns you get to draw a card for free. That is broken. That is crazy good. It also means that your hands with, say, 1 cost arrow and a buff become 2 card 8s with on hits. It's a really good chess piece that lets you block out more and also lets you play bigger hands as well. As I said, Trench is just in there for the Earth matchups. I really like it into Verdance in particular because she doesn't attack you every turn, she'll send Arcane, and so being able to trench away that arsenal and clear it up is very important. Speaking of clearing the arsenal as well, you'll notice that if I'm not running Trench, I only have 1 way to clear the arsenal, which is Long Draw. You shouldn't need more than 1. If you find yourself trap locked, you've done something wrong. Because I've been playing this style of Riptide for over a year now. Not once I've been trap locked. It's very easy to play around, and also the deck itself is built to mitigate that from happening. And then the last equipment piece I'm playing is Snapdragon Scalers. This is a pseudo unbrick your arsenal, because if we don't have a go again arrow in our arsenal, or we've got bolt and shot in arsenal and no buff, and we really want to set a wide turn, then Snapdragon Scalers can be used to clear that up and then clear your arsenal so you can do Death Dealer and hopefully dig for a buff that you sorely need. It also gives you access to some crazy powerful Rain Razor's turns. I'll go through the zero cost arrows first. In no particular order, we have 2 copies of Stone Rain, 2 copies of Murkmire, 3 copies of Red Drill Shot, 2 copies of Endless Arrow, 2 copies of Falcon Wing, and we have a complete rainbow of Bolt and Shot. There's a lot of 2-ofs in this deck, but in my mind at least it makes sense. So Stone Rain, this is a sideboard card. This is only in here for your pitch stack matchups where you think you could maybe get fatigued, or if you want to, I don't know, take them second cycle and guarantee a kill, then that's why we've got it in here. I'm playing Line It Up as a buff, which I'll go over later, so you can guarantee getting that aim counter if you're stacking properly. I'm only playing 2 because I've only got 3 ways to give aim counters in the whole deck, and if you pair that with cards like Codex, then I've got plenty of options for giving aim counters. 2 Murkmire, this is for Prism and for Enigma. You don't need more than 2. Both are actually very good matchups for this style of list. The 2 Murkmires just kind of help solidify it a bit. If you consider Codex, you got access to 5, that's plenty, should be enough. Drill Shot, this is an insanely good value 0 for 4. It gets rid of our opponent's armor, and this deck is breakpoints galore, so getting rid of armor, super important, even if you don't get the aim counter in this style of Riptide. Just playing buff and a Drill Shot can get you so much value. Next, we've got 2 copies of Endless Arrow. Endless Arrow is very important to the deck, and at the same time, it can break your deck a bit. You don't want to see too many of it, because you've only got one way to clear your arsenal in terms of like Snapdragon Scalers, and you want to save long draw for like when you need a buff, not just for using it away willy-nilly. So 3 Endless Arrow can be a bit clunky, but at the same time, some of your most powerful turns are with Endless Arrow and Snapdragon Scalers, and it also lets you play the mid-range plan very, very effectively. So I like 2. And then Falcon Wing at 2. 3 just doesn't quite feel necessary, but at the same time, Falcon Wing is probably your best ponder target. Just starting your turn off with a Falcon Wing, you're instantly asking your opponent a question without giving away too much information. So really strong card. And then we've got the Bolt and Shots. These are for making the most of your Rain Razor's turns, for enabling the deck to go as wide as possible while threatening irrelevant on-hit. Bolt and Shot in Riptide is a bit of a trap, because you never know if blocking it is worthwhile or not. If I've got, say, if I'm coming at you with Bolt and Shot for 7, I've used Death Dealer, got 2 cards left in hand, you don't know whether or not those 2 cards are arrows, or if it's a Codex and another buff. So it puts your opponent in a really rough spot. Red ones are best for attacking, but they all serve a very good purpose. Pitching the yellow and the blue for the late game with the Rain Razors lets you have a very, very strong turn while also fueling your earlier turns as well. For the rest of the arrows, I'm playing 3 copies of Heatseeker, 3 copies of Remorseless, and 3 copies of Battering Bolt. These arrows all serve a very good purpose, so we want to see all of them as much as possible. Heatseeker is incredible value because you've got New Horizons. If you've got Tunic Up and you play Premeditate, trigger Riptide to reload, and you fire Heatseeker, that's a 2-card 8 that nets you an additional 2 cards. That is insane value. If that hits, your odds of winning that game are insanely high, unless you've somehow already lost it. Remorseless is very, very good for keeping up with the aggro decks. It punishes them for going wide, and they generally have a hard time blocking it, especially if you're buffing it once or twice. They're probably taking it, so the value on Remorseless is insane. The no D-react text is relevant into the slower matchups as well. And then lastly, for the arrows, we have 3 copies of Battering Bolt. I only side this in for matchups where the effect is always relevant, because it's a 2 cost, which means it puts quite a strain on your resource curve, and because there's like no other good 2 cost attack to put in the deck, it's not really worth building a resource base around Battering Bolt. The relevant matchups for this are Warriors, Assassins, and the MST heroes. Do not side this in versus Aurora. I think it's a bit of a trap. You'll often need to tank damage to send it, if you can send it, and even then, most of the time its effect isn't really that relevant, because the only instants they tend to play now are Channel Lightning Valley, Somersault, Lightning Press, and Discharge. Channel Lightning Valley and Somersault, they can play those no problem. So you're basically playing Battering Bolt to try and catch them out with Lightning Press and Discharge. That's not really consistent enough to warrant putting it in the deck, in my opinion. You've just got better options that fit the cost curve a lot better. And then even if it does hit and they have like an Electrostatic Discharge in hand, It's hardly backbreaking like it is against Zen, where like the card you're discarding is core for their engine requirement. And now I'll go over the non-arrow attack actions. I've got 3 copies of E-Strike, and then for the super saucy sauce, I've got 3 copies of Sound the Alarm, and then I've got Codex as well. This is just like an honorary attack action. Enlighten Strike lets you go wider, lets you dig through the deck faster, and it is a 2-card 7 if you need it to be. When you pair this with Death Dealer, say you've got a 0-cost arrow in hand and you've got E-Strike, what you can do is just counter off Tunic, pay to load with Death Dealer, go E-Strike for 5, and then send the arrow. Amazing value, really good. E-Strike lets you get over the fatigue decks and also lets you outvalue the faster decks as well. And now for the new card from the Hunted, Sound the Alarm. I like to test out new spice with each season, and Sound the Alarm is the spice of today. It's a 1-card 5 that lets you search out any trap you want or any D-React. That includes legendary traps. You are particularly well positioned to use this card in this version of Riptide because you can play it off a Tunic counter for amazing value. It's also a viable Codex target if you're a bit behind, as you can play Sound the Alarm, then choose what D-React you'd like to get from your Ponder. Also pairs nicely with Premeditate for this reason too. Plus, Riptide's ability makes it super easy to get the buff effect as well. So you can send Sound the Alarm for 8 off 2 cards. Really strong. And get a legendary trap in return. The reason it's in here as well is Death Dealer can have a bit of a harder time into the Warriors and Assassins compared to other iterations of the hero, and this card really helps smooth up those matchups. I don't know if I need to say anything about Codex. It's just a super strong card, enables very wide turns, and it also lets you play that mid-range style very nicely as well. Next I'll go on to the buffs. I've got 3 copies of Seek and Destroy, 3 copies of Lace of Bloodrot, 3 copies of Premeditate. I'll just make space for the others here. And I've got 3 copies of Lace with Inertia. That rounds up the red buffs. And for the yellow buffs, I've got 3 copies of Line It Up, and I also have the 3 Rain Razors. Now the red buffs here, these are the ones that I think are the best value and the most disruptive. Lace of Bloodrot, it's a 0 for 5. Premeditate, at least a 0 for 5. And Seek and Destroy and Lace with Inertia are very disruptive. They let you play off 6-card hands while your opponent is playing off 4-card hands because they can't get an arsenal. So if you're new to Riptide, playing a buff in a 0 cost is your bread and butter turn cycle. Block 6, send 7 with 2 on hits. We're on a total of 18 buffs. I think this is just about the right amount. Any higher and you start to brick a little bit too much, but you do need to see a good amount for your bolt and shots to have consistent go again. Line Up is in here because if it fills a variety of roles. As I said earlier, it helps in your pitch type matchups with Stone Rain. It gets you dominating late game, very powerful. It can also give +1 to your Falcon Wings, and it can give your drill shots an aim counter, which gives it piercing. And also it's a yellow, so it pitches, which is good to send down with your pitch stack, and it blocks 3 and punts by 3. So it kind of just does everything. It's like a glue card. And lastly, I've got 3 copies of Rain Razors. Don't play this into aggro decks. Do not play this into Aurora, do not play this into Syndra. Into decks that you need to block, don't play it. You don't need it, you will win the game without it. This is in here for your mid-range games and for your fatigue games. This is the card that lets you put together 30 plus damage turns, and if you're not playing 3 of this, you're going to find yourself getting fatigued quite a lot. So I'd fully recommend Rain Razors. Playing both Line It Up and Rain Razors means that if you're into a slower hero that is trying to fatigue you, then you have 2 accesses to approach your second cycle. You can set up that big, really wide Rain Razors turn, but you can also set up a really big Dominate as well. It just gives you quite a lot of options. Lastly, I'll move on to the D-Reacts. So I am playing 3 copies of Sink Below, 3 copies of Shelter from the Storm, 100 legit, totally authentic copy, and we're playing 3 copies of Boulder Trap, 3 copies of Tar Pit Trap, and 1 of each legendary trap. Let me just line those up a bit more nicely. Right, so the Sink Below and the Shelter, just because it's not a trap doesn't mean you can't play them. The number 4 in the bottom is often more important than the 1 ping you get from Riptide. These 2 cards are incredibly powerful. For starters, they can trigger your Riptide reload, so you can easily block above rate and then send attacks above rate. Sink can fix a bricked hand, so it's a good all-rounder. Shelter really helps with the Aurora and Syndra matchups, as you'll likely all know, but I also like it into New because if they go at you with a CNC and they have their Rousing Wave up, if you block 6 and they go for the Rousing Wave, you can bait it and then you can use Shelter from the Storm to cover that up, and they're very sad. If it's too expensive, which I think it is, then you could instead play Fate Foreseen or Take Cover. The number 4 on the bottom of that card is more important than the effect. Speaking of Shell, I just haven't been able to get my hands on a copy yet. Imagine using proxies, what a loser. Speaking of the other traps, I'm not playing any red traps. I like my traps having dual modes in this style of list, so I like being able to pitch with them, and I like being able to block with them. Boulder Trap and Tar Pit Trap, they have the most relevant effect out of your yellow traps. They're both insanely powerful, and obviously your legendary traps are incredibly powerful as well. Because everyone is running around playing Flick Knives, throwing daggers everywhere, Spike Pit Trap has got considerably better. These two obviously still both amazing. And that concludes the deck tech. Riptide in this meta with Death Dealer is a very well positioned hero. You're going to have a lot of 50-50 matchups. I guess if I were to tell you who you'd want to avoid, you'd really want to avoid Vincent and Kano. Those two feel very rough. Florian is doable, but you have to get to your pitch deck very quickly. Your All Victor can be a bit tricky, but they're way better than they used to be. And besides that, everything else, you have a good game into it. It's really fun. So if you like drawing cards and you like either doing 30 plus damage turns or you like mid-ranging the hell out of your opponent, then this is the deck for you. If you have any questions, comments, anything like that, then feel free to ask them, I guess, even though I couldn't stop you if I wanted. And hopefully you've learned something from this deck. And hopefully as well, we get something good for Riptide in the upcoming set. Because the deck is good, but it's rogue tier. You can feel when you're playing it that it needs just a little bit of help in terms of power level. It's not had proper support in a while, and you can really tell. But in the hands of someone that knows how to play the deck, you can do very well, and it's very rewarding to play as well. And with that, I wish you a good day.